Hey, welcome to the Elle Russ Show. My name is Elle Russ, and I am a #1 best-selling author and master coach. My intention is to inspire, educate, and motivate you with weekly content featuring amazing guests and solo episodes. Visit my website, elleruss.com, to learn more about me, my courses, free masterclasses, partner discounts, and much more. Enjoy the show. All right, so today is a solo episode. I'm going to discuss a couple of the tenets of paleo primal living, ancestral health. I think this is confusing for a lot of people. There is so much to be said on this topic. I wrote a book where half of this is explained, but I'm going to talk through two major points that have to be made. One is that most people, when they look at following a paleo primal ancestral diet, they look at a food list and they think, oh, well, I'll just eat from this food list. That is not paleo primal. It's only a little bit of it. So yes, it's eating from a food list, but it's eating in a certain way. It's looking at macros in a certain way, and it's definitely moving and exercising in a very, very different way. So I'll give a little synopsis of paleo primal, and then I want to go into sugar burner and fat burner because there are only two people in this world, okay? Two humans out there. You are either a sugar burner or you're a fat burner. And this has to do with how you metabolically eat, move, and all of the other things. And I want to give this distinction because this is very important. Becoming a fat burner will absolutely nip any food obsessions that you have, and a lot of disordered eating as well. Sugar burner will keep you on a terrible train with an inability to maintain weight loss, struggling with brain and energy, having to eat every 2-3 hours. And also, it sort of makes you hypoglycemic when you're a sugar burner. It's a terrible way to be. It's what Paleo Primal strives to get people out of, is being a sugar burner because it's very detrimental to your health. All right, so let me just go briefly talk about, look, as humans, we're all born with a DNA map. All species are, right? We do not feed horses beef ribs and, potato soup, right? We feed horses hay because that's what they eat, right? And carrots or whatever, okay? So we all have our own DNA maps, and as humans, we were prescribed our own DNA map. But unfortunately, people have taken a detour from this over the past 10,000 years. We've been evolving for 2.5 million. Our About 120,000 years ago, those ancestors were very much like us, okay? Of course, they didn't have maybe some of the advancements in language, but they spoke to each other. They literally were very much like us. They weren't just running into cave, pulling women by their hair into caves. I'm not saying it didn't happen, but this impression of being like dumb cavemen, no, like that's not it. Okay, so we've been evolving for a very long time. So even, 60,000 years ago, 100,000 years ago, modern humans were very much like we are now. But in the past 10,000 years, that's when problems happened because the agricultural revolution happened 10,000 years ago, where people really were like, okay, we're settling down, we're going to farm our animals, we're not wandering anymore. And that's when grains came on the scene, which was a problem. Then dairy came on the scene, problem. Then sugar came on the scene, problems. And so now we have, and this opened the door and invited in the diseases of modern life because before 10,000 years ago, on the archaeological record, meaning when they have paleontologists that are looking at samples and they can go, oh, this sample of a DNA is obviously a cow. This DNA is obviously a horse, right? This DNA is a human. They never saw rheumatoid arthritis on the archaeological record anywhere before the advent of the agricultural revolution and grains. And I talk about it in my book, and again, I'm making a correlation here that's not necessarily factual on this one, but it's funny because the first known instances of thyroid issues were like, I don't know, 12,000, is it 12,000 BC or 12,000 years ago? I forget, in China. And I looked up, and at the time, it was Emperor Five Grains. And I thought, is there a correlation there with the huge amount of grains into that world? And then suddenly the thyroid problems showing up on the record. But anyway, at least rheumatoid arthritis had not shown up on the archaeological record, and we know for sure that grains and gluten absolutely exacerbate all autoimmune disorders. All right, back to paleothyroid solution. Sorry, not paleothyroid solution, but paleo principles in general. I'm going to run through the list and then I want to get into sugar burner versus fat burner. All right, so what's paleo? Eat plants, animals, fish, and fat. There you go. And so what does that mean? That means you're eliminating grains, beans, and legumes, all grains, white rice, bread, everything. Now, I know that sounds really harsh. If you haven't gone paleo, then nobody wants to hear that. So you could start off by eliminating the glutinous grains and sticking with white organic rice, maybe as the thing. But in general, that's what it is, eliminating grains, beans, and legumes, limiting dairy and potatoes to occasional, okay? Unless you're an athlete. You might need to eat more sweet potatoes if you're an athlete to get more carbs. The general principles of paleo primal living really have to do with looking at your carbohydrate intake. The goal is to say under 150 total grams of carbohydrates per day. Okay, so a smaller woman like me, I'm 5'2". I can't do 150 grams of carbohydrates every single day. I will gain weight. So maybe for me, some days it's 120, maybe one day it's 150. I go on a big hike, maybe the next day it's 80. I stay between there and then sometimes I go very low. But if you look at staying in between 80 and 150 and kind of going through there. Now, let me just break something down for you. 150 grams of carbohydrates. What does that mean? It means you're going to have to go online and start to look up the things that you eat and what the carbohydrate content is of it. Now, meat, no carbs. Fat, no carbs. Vegetables, carbs. Fruit, carbs. Grains, carbs. Beans, carbs. So let's just talk about potatoes for a second. So one large baked potato is about 64 grams of carbohydrates. So in a day of like 100, you have to gauge it. Are you going to have that potato, but then also drink the green drink that's 25 grams of carbohydrates, right? So it's really about playing the carb game at first to get yourself to be fat adapted, which I'll talk about in a minute. So it's the carbs, getting adequate sleep, consuming probiotics in some form, whether that's natural or otherwise, managing stress, and also exercise. We stick with low intensity exercise. The best way to look at this is just take the number 180 and subtract your age. So 180 minus whatever your age is. That number, that result, is a heart rate that you should not go over more than a couple times a week. I mean, again, unless you're an athlete, but assuming you're not a professional athlete listening to this, what does that mean? That means maybe 1 or 2 sprint sessions a week. But if you're like running every day and you're running on that treadmill and you are above that number, 180 minus your age, you are in a sugar burning, we call it glycolytic burning sort of state. You don't want to be there. You want to be in the fat burning state. So that's why we always say, hey, do a 15-minute sprint session every 7 to 10 days, right? Something like that. Obviously, optimizing nutrients, vitamin D, omega-3s, selenium, all this other stuff. And also, we say, hey, only when you're hungry, because when you start to adopt a paleo primal strategy, you will realize that you might wake up and not be hungry, then you do not force yourself to eat breakfast. It's a weird place to be, but that is how it goes. You might notice that for yourself. Some people still love breakfast. I don't. I almost never eat breakfast ever. I literally can't stand having food in my body before a certain time. And it's not the exact time, it's more about how long I've been up because there are some days where like maybe I was up at 4 in the morning, so I might be hungry by 11. But if I'm normally up at like 6:30, something like that, then I probably don't usually eat until 12 or 1, sometimes a little later. But my first meal might be at like noon or 1. So I can't stand it. But then I know other people who are totally fat adapted and paleo primal and they love breakfast, but like they hate dinner. So it's really like it's eat when you're hungry. But if you're a sugar burner, you're going to be eating when you're hungry because the signals aren't right. So the reason the paleo primal lifestyle is so different to all these other eating strategies is it enables you to get off this carbohydrate dependency hamster wheel. And this is the cause of so many diseases, right? And that's why you want to adopt a paleo primal paradigm to transition you into a fat burning machine. So let's talk about sugar burner versus fat burner. There are only two type of metabolic humans out there. You are either a sugar burner or a fat burner. So how do you know if you're a sugar burner? First of all, let me describe what it is, and then I will describe all of the symptoms to indicate to you whether this is you. If you are a sugar burner, then your body is dependent on, example, addicted to, fueling itself on glucose, all right, sugar. So if you're a sugar burner, you have trained your body to function in this way. And many people do this unwittingly. I mean, it's based on, they do it unknowingly because it's based on flawed conventional diet wisdom that instructs people to eat every 2, 3 hours or to adopt some low fat, high carbohydrate diet. And this is the reason why so many people cannot lose weight or maintain weight loss without struggling, is that they are sugar burners. So, how do you know if you're a sugar burner? You are a sugar burner if you can't go more than 8+ waking hours without eating because you will get cranky, have a drop in physical or mental energy, or experience any other negative symptoms. Yes, I said that. That's 8+ hours. And you might be like, I don't know anyone that can go 8 hours. Every single primal adapted fat burning individual I know can go 8 hours without food and have no problem. Like an emergency happens, something's happened, you miss your lunch and then 8 hours go by. Here's why. When you are a fat burner, and I'll get into this more a little bit later, but when you're a fat burner versus a sugar burner, when your body doesn't have food, instead of suffering, because it's been addicted to glucose, instead of suffering and going, oh no, and makes you sleepy and tired, and you're like, oh, I don't have food, I'm so tired, my brain doesn't work, I'm cranky. When you're a fat burner and you don't have food, the body kicks in and fuels your brain and your body based on fat from your own body. The difference between a sugar burner and a fat burner is basically like one is extremely efficient and sustaining, and the other is a short-lived, will kick your ass later type of paradigm, and will also contribute to type 2 diabetes. All right, so let's say you struggle to lose weight, you're a sugar burner. Can you not keep weight off because it's such a struggle? That's part of it. Big part of being a sugar burner is not being able to get food off of your mind. You're obsessed. You keep looking in the fridge every 2 hours. I thought it was crazy. I talked in my book and elsewhere many times about feeling like I would have to go to Overeaters Anonymous. I was like, is everyone else suffering? It felt inherent. It felt like, how could this be any different? When you are food obsessed and you can't get it off your mind, which by the way is kind of a secret thing, usually people aren't expressing that, which is why I am right now. If this is you, this goes away once you change your paradigm. Okay. I want to make a caveat here on all like afflictions and diseases. If someone has serious hypothyroidism or some other situation, disease, something metabolic that I don't know about, like you can't get fat adapted. Okay. So people will be like, I tried paleo. I followed the whole thing. I tried to do it. I couldn't get fat adapted. I'm still addicted to food. And I'm like, yeah, well, you're hypothyroid. When you're hypothyroid, you cannot get fat adapted. So if you're listening to this, you're currently hypothyroid and you haven't fixed it yet, which hopefully you know by listening to me that you can, and you can fix this through natural or other means. Once you get proper thyroid levels, you absolutely can become paleo primal fat adapted. But if you are hyperthyroid or hypothyroid, you cannot get fat adapted and you will struggle with food obsessions. Okay. So here's the thing. Not only not getting food off your mind, you crave sugary foods and it takes a ton of willpower. Now you might say, oh, well, this is definitely not me. I don't crave sugar, hate sweets. Guess what? You don't probably realize then that grain-based carbohydrates like bread, rice, cereal, baked goods, that is sugar. It's sugar. People don't think that tortilla chips are sugar. Okay. Carbs are carbs are carbs. Okay. It doesn't matter. Listen, one can of Coca-Cola has 38 grams of carbohydrates. Okay. So does 3 slices of sugared mango from Trader Joe's. Your body doesn't know the difference between the 38 grams of carbohydrates. It's sugar, it's sugar. Carbs are sugar. All carbs equal sugar. Some are better choices than others. One bunch of asparagus cooked might be 20 grams of carbohydrates, a baked potato might be 64, and the bag of cotton candy might be 100. It doesn't matter. Carbs are carbs. So if you don't think you have a sweet tooth, look at your grain-based consumptions. You're a sugar burner if you can't seem to burn fat, if you're hungry every 2 to 5 hours, you have drops in energy during the day. Look, it's really a struggle to be a sugar burner. And life is so much easier. You can exercise less. You can go a day without exercising and not be like, oh, I'm going to gain weight. Sugar burning lifestyle is leads to terrible outcomes. All right, so let's talk about what's a fat burner. So if you're a fat burner, then you can use fat from your diet and the fat stored in your body to fuel yourself. Okay, so fat's been a primary fuel source for humans for 2.5 million years, both from storage, right, like from fat on their body, and then also just a predominant macronutrient in the human diet, right, eating meat and the fat off the meat, etc., right? It was energy rich. The high fat elements of animal products, omega-3 fatty acids, these all facilitated the development of a more complex brain, and it allowed humans to branch out from their vegetarian ape cousins, right, to eventually rise to the top of the food chain. So our genetic makeup is really still the same as our hunter-gatherer ancestors who lived 50,000 years ago, 60,000 years ago, even 100. And our preference for fat burning conflicts with this government food pyramid. It conflicts with the zone diet. It conflicts with a lot of these weight loss paradigms, and it conflicts with every single weight loss show and the paradigms they use to have those people lose weight. That's why they never keep it off. So, the government food pyramid in the US recommends that you eat 6 to 11 servings of grains per day and 2 to 4 servings of fruit while limiting your fat intake and a lot of other irrational suggestions. Okay, so that's why we all have type 2 diabetes. We are the only living things on the face of the earth who have food issues. Okay, animals in the wild don't require food every 2 to 3 hours to maintain energy and stamina. Humans have burned fat as a primary source of energy all throughout evolution. It really just started to fall apart about 10,000 years ago. Our hunter-gatherer ancestors were not only lean and fit, they didn't have diseases of modern life like type 2 diabetes, hypothyroidism, autoimmune disorders, until the abrupt transition to a grain-based diet, that agricultural movement 10,000 years ago. Just the decline of human health was just right there. So once we started, settling down in an area, stopped wandering, started to domesticate animals, dairy came on the scene. About 7,000 years ago, sugar showed up only 200 years ago. A high carbohydrate diet is a high insulin producing diet. That inhibits fat metabolism, making you dependent on regular carbohydrate feedings in order to sustain mental energy. That's why I can go 8+ hours without eating, having no drops, not needing to sleep. Because at a certain point, my body, as a fat burner, goes, uh-oh, and kicks into taking fat from my body to fuel my brain and my energy. But if you're a sugar burner, then you run out of the thing you've been fueling and training your body to fuel with, and you're gonna crash. So when you are dependent upon regular carbohydrate feedings in order to make, sustain mental or physical energy, then this promotes a lifelong accumulation of excess body fat, an exhaustion of your adrenal glands. It's the fight or flight. Look, when your blood pressure, when your blood glucose drops because you are a sugar burner and it's hour 4 now, and it's dropping, your adrenals don't like this. They don't like a fucking roller coaster. When you're a sugar burner, you're up, you eat, you drop, you're down, you're up. And that's why you have to eat every 2 to 3 hours. That's insane. It's also not fun. Who wants to eat a little bit every 2 to 3 hours? I want to eat a big ass fucking meal and go to town and pig out. And you can once you change this whole paradigm. So in a way, being a sugar burner is not only just a absolute terrible paradigm for human health and all of this stuff, but it feeds into and creates a food addiction that makes then you think somehow this is how life is. And it's not. And I was there and I know. The biggest gift of Paleo Primal is the fact that it can end food obsessions. It's absolutely amazing. So, living life as a sugar burner is like a never-ending struggle to balance calories in with calories out. A grain-infused high carbohydrate diet also promotes inflammation and free radical damage in the body. It accelerates the aging process. It contributes to heart disease, cancer. Our hunter-gatherer ancestors ate a diet high in animal flesh and animal fat, along with very low carbohydrate, low sugar consumption. Did you know that humans can live their entire lives without ever eating a single carbohydrate, but you cannot survive without protein and fat? And here's why. Because our bodies, not only will our bodies actually produce glucose on their own, but excess protein from animals goes through a process called gluconeogenesis, which converts excess protein into glucose. So, in times of overeating animal flesh in the wild, when there was no carbs around, let's say in winter somewhere, hunter-gatherer ancestors, their human bodies, it, it would, their bodies would turn that excess protein into carbohydrates. So you can live your whole life without ever eating a carb, but you can't live without protein and fat. So say a lot. When you have too many carbs, you got type 2 diabetes. We all know this. We see what's happening in the world. So we're all born with this like perfect genetic formula to live a long, happy life. But the introduction of grains, sugar, dairy, and excess carbohydrate consumption has over time just turned millions of people into sugar burners, including myself. I was there for many years. And sugar burners are glucose dependent. A sugar burning existence is going to put you at risk for food addictions, hypoglycemia, insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes, adrenal gland issues. And all of this, just because it's in my wheelhouse, it links back to how it negatively affects thyroid hormone metabolism, which would negatively affect your sex hormone metabolism, male or female. All right. So, how do you know if you're a fat burner? You're a fat burner if you can go more than 8 to 10, even 24 hours without eating food and still maintain incredible physical, mental energy and stamina with zero desire for food. I know that sounds impossible. You're going, yeah, Elle, really? And I'm going, no, 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 but it's true. I, I, I mean, not that you'd want to be there, but that if you're there, you're not suffering like the sugar burner would be. Another tenet would be that you effortlessly lose weight and maintain weight loss without mental or physical struggles. Look, 80% of your body composition is what you eat. Another tenet of being a fat burner is you forget about food. Like you're not obsessed with your next meal. This was like a miracle to me when I was food obsessed and a sugar burner and I thought this was me and how am I going to live my life this way? And oh my fucking God. I mean, oh, like I sometimes I just want to cry thinking about being in that state because it's like a horrible addiction that you can never satisfy. And and I talk about this because when paleo primal peeps out there and authors like me talk about getting fat adapted, sometimes we talk about how, wow, like I used to be able to eat this amount of food and now I'm eating so much less, but being satiated the same. Now, here's the thing. If you are a sugar burner and you hear that, you're going to have the thought like me, which is like, whoa, no, 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 no. I already can't get enough food and want to eat as much as I can. So the idea of me even eating less food than I'm eating now, like, I don't want to even know what that's like. It's very similar to when I used to be addicted to cigarettes many, many years ago. I in thinking about quitting, it was a weird thing, and maybe you'll relate to this. It was like I wanted to quit. Clearly, I knew that I was fucking killing myself, but I also was like, I don't even want to know what it's like to not want it. Yeah, so the same kind of goes for like, I don't even want to know what it's like to want to eat less than I'm already eating because I want to eat more than I'm eating now. And if that shit's going on in your fucking brain, you are a sugar burner. So you forget about food. You're not obsessed with your next meal. You just don't give a shit. You start to get like, oh yeah, I'm gonna start to need to eat soon. But when you're a sugar burner, you're like, oh my God, I'm gonna fucking murder somebody if I don't eat. So So you forget about food, you're not obsessed with your next meal, and you don't crave sugar or grain-based foods. So, like our hunter-gatherer ancestors, listen, a person who's fat adapted can go 8 to 24 hours without eating, still have full mental focus. When's the last time you went more than 5 hours without food and didn't have a meltdown? It's rare for millions of Americans. Continuing to live as a sugar burner will absolutely contribute to terrible adrenal function, poor glucose management, all sorts of stuff. But when people adopt a paleo lifestyle correctly, they experience a freedom that really only fat burners understand. And I can tell you because I've been both. And I know it's tough because sometimes, you get these diet advice, and sometimes you want to look at people and go, I remember back then being like, hey, man, I don't hear you fucking suffering out there. Like, yeah, maybe it's easier for you to do, but like, I'm over here with this problem in my head. I'm obsessed with food. And the truth is that it's like, you're not alone, and it's not a non-fixable thing. This is not a permanent way that you are. You have eaten yourself into being a sugar burner without knowing it. It takes about 21 days. It takes about a month to really turn on these switches, to really become a fat burner. So that is really the difference between a sugar burner and a fat burner. Paleo primal living is, hey, exercise at whatever the result of 180 minus your age. You want to be at that heart rate or under to sustain fat burning sort of workouts versus the glycolytic sugar burning workouts. Why? So I just told you about sugar burners and fat burners. I told you about, hey, look, Paleo Primal, we try to stay under 150 grams of carbohydrates a day unless you're a bricklayer or an athlete. So we can only store so much glucose in all of our organs and everything. So when you pig out on the sugar and now you need to go burn it off, or it's going to get stored and you're going to get fat. So now you're on the treadmill or you're on the bike at the, exercise bike at the gym, and you're trying to sweat it off. And that's the thing. It's like, oh, I'm doing this so I can eat more. That's a sugar burner because fat burners don't have that paradigm. But if you're a sugar burner, then you do. And I remember that too. It's like you eat a lot and then go, okay, well, then I'll just go exercise it off the next day. So if you can't store that much glucose everywhere. So then if you're exhausting it each day by burning it off because you ate it, now you're empty, you're going to crave it again. So for example, when I was a sugar burner and I would go hiking, I was hiking at maybe to sugar burning, not fat burning. I needed to go a little bit slower on my hiking. I was kind of hauling ass, thinking that the harder and faster I walk, the more I sweat, the more shitty this fucking hike feels like a pain in the ass, then the better it's going to be for my heart and the more fat I'm going to burn. Turns out I was absolutely wrong because that glycolytic, burning hike would only just burn the carbs out of my entire body so that by the time I was done with the hike, I was starving. And then a few hours later, I'd be like sleepy and just starving. But when I started Paleo Primal and I really looked at all of these metrics and all of these things, I was like, okay, my hiking felt really lazy at first. Like, because I'd be looking at my heart rate monitor and I'd be walking. I'm like, come on, this can't be burning fat this slow. I'm walking. Like, come on. Right. Because harder, faster, like that seems like that's going to do it. And it fucking doesn't. And think about it, our ancestors wouldn't have hauled ass to the top of the mountain to see what was on the other side because it would exhaust all of their glucose stores and it would have probably exhausted them, right? So they would have just taken their time up there, rest along the way, leisure. So I would hike at a different pace, a much slower pace, and then I would realize that afterwards I wasn't starving. I wasn't dying. In fact, I could actually wait because I had burned fat on the hike, not burned the glucose that I had just shoved in my face the night before from being a sugar burner. So, what are the keys to paleo fat adaptation? Well, you consume quality paleo primal foods, you manage carbohydrates. For a smaller woman like me, you might need to stay around 100 grams of total carbohydrates per day or lower. It just depends. Perhaps your exercise level, depending on the day, indicates how many carbs. Essentially this becomes intuitive. Low intensity exercise combined with occasional sprint session. Lifestyle stuff, getting adequate sleep, sunlight, fresh air, stress reduction. Look, I don't care if you're living in the middle of New York City, turn on YouTube, watch some video about, 4K drone over the mountains of Switzerland, whatever to get you in nature if you can't be in it. And in general, here's the paleo primal ratio, but it's basically high fat, moderate protein, low carb, but I also like to say, because this would be a personal thing, is that it can be high protein, moderate fat, low carb, but it's always low carb. And your threshold with fat and protein is individual. I know for me, here's the thing. A high fat diet doesn't mean eating all the fat that you can. Okay. Because if you eat it, you can get fat on a keto diet, which is extremely low carb. You can get fat on a low carb diet if you are eating more fat than you are burning. So, some people, when they start paleo, and this was me, I made a mistake. I didn't know what to snack on. I was still a sugar burner. So, I kept eating all these nuts. Nuts are nutrient dense, a lot of fat. They're high caloric. A shot glass is a serving. I would eat handfuls. So, at first, I was like gaining fat on a low carb diet. Keto can do that too. So people think, and again, it's not about high fat doesn't mean what's most on your plate. It just means how in relation to the other things. And someone like me, I work best on a high protein, moderate fat, low carb diet, not a high fat, moderate protein. So essentially, those two things are switched, but the thoroughfare is low carb. But all four of these components of paleo primal living really have to be adopted if you want to achieve like the success in all of the areas, right? The adrenal, the weight loss, the blood glucose management. So in the next round, I'll do an episode on insulin, blood sugar, type 2 diabetes, and those sorts of elements. So maybe you understand them further. But this is sort of the Paleo 101. Now, there's a lot more on this topic I'll get into, but at the very minimum, you need to walk away today. Am I a sugar burner or am I a fat burner? If you are a sugar burner, based on my description, then it really behooves you to go look into a paleo primal ancestral health, all the same sort of term, paradigm, and strategy so that you can be really your ultimate. I mean, and again, if you have any food obsessions or addictions, it's the only thing that fixed it for me. And I believe I've spent really since my teenage years up until about age 40, absolutely sugar burning, mentally addicted to food issues. So get on it. Look at that pantry at the very minimum. Like, well, how do I start? Get rid of the shitty oils, get rid of canola oils, corn oil, sunflower, start having real butter, get rid of the margarine. At the very minimum, throw out the crappy oils. Don't eat shitty oils. Uh, maybe eliminate glutinous grains at first if you can't imagine. Look, I don't expect anyone cold turkeys any of this. Do it in stages. If you're a sugar addict, don't quit all the sugar. Maybe just eat blueberries and whipped cream and fruit and whipped cream for a few days versus like the Twinkies, right? Uh, Maybe just make it less crappy, even though it's still sugar, and sort of start to train your palate. Because when you train your palate through going paleo primal, then blueberries and whipped cream is like a fucking cake. Where when you are a sugar addict, and I can say this from experience, blueberries taste like shit. They are not sweet enough. It's because you've gotten used to it. It's just an addiction. It's a glucose addiction. And it's really no different than frickin' crack and anything else, right? You're sleepy, you eat some sugar, you eat some carbs, you wake up, you're like, well, that's how, yeah, well, Dr. Forsman loves to give the example of when you're a heroin addict and you're coming down off of heroin and you take some heroin, you will feel better. That doesn't mean it's the right move or that it's good for you, right? So I'm here for you. You don't need to get the paleo thyroid solution if you don't have a thyroid problem. That wouldn't be the paleo book to buy. I always suggest going to marksdailyapple.com or reading the original book, The Primal Blueprint by Mark Sisson. That's on Amazon and it's in its fourth or fifth edition now. And I mean, that really sums it up. Or I would also, if you're like, oh, I can't even afford a book, that's fine. Go to YouTube, type in Mark Sisson interview Primal and just go look at some old interviews of Mark from, you know, 2016, 17, 18, not somewhere around there, talking about paleo primal living. I used to host the Primal Blueprint podcast, which was Mark Sisson's podcast. Um, there's so many episodes on that show, and the episodes are archived at blog.primalblueprint.com. But if you were to you're like, I don't know, what the hell do I do about Paleo Primal? Mark Sisson and Brad Kearns, his co-author, uh, the first 10, 14 episodes of the Primal Blueprint podcast are just literally all of the Paleo Primal principles. And so if you were to just Google Primal Blueprint podcast episode number 1, and then you'd probably have to do it again for episode number 2, because again, there's over hundreds and hundreds of episodes of that podcast. They're all archived now. It would be difficult to find them by scrolling through web pages, right? So that's another free way to hear Mark Sisson and Brad Kearns, who really are my teachers, to hear them talk about paleo primal living and all of those concepts. You can also go to my website, elleruss.com. If you do have a thyroid problem, my ultimate thyroid course, I go through details on all of the paleo primal stuff. And hey, you guys, a lot of the stuff you could just find out online for free. You know what I mean? I mean, if you need a coach or you need someone, I always suggest Elizabeth Resnick. She's at Happy, Healthy, and Hot on Instagram, and also Coach Barbara Jean on Instagram. Barbara and Elizabeth are both in their late 50s and walk the talk and are both paleo primal and really understand how to maintain this and all of the tricks and eating tips, etc. Barbara's an author, and Elizabeth has a couple of cookbooks. If you're looking for a paleo primal coach, I would go seek them out, because they really have helped so many people lose weight, and that's their jam. All right, everyone. I will see you next week. Hey, listeners. Over the years, a ton of companies have approached me to collaborate, but I will only promote companies whose products I believe in and that I actually use and consume on a regular basis. So let me tell you about some of my favorite companies that I can offer you discounts for. Rep Provisions, an amazing company doing incredible things for our planet, topsoil, and animals with regenerative agriculture, and it's my #1 source for quality pasture-raised meat and chicken. Visit repprovisions.com and use code L15 for 15% off. I'm also obsessed with a company called Carnivore Crisps. They make a lean, all-natural, and delicious alternative to conventional snacking, made with just real meat and real salt. Totally addictive, and my favorite ones are the beef brisket and the ribeye. Visit carnivorecrisps.com and use code PALEO10 for 10% off. I also love and regularly use Paleo Valley products. They make amazing supplements and delicious paleo products. I use the superfood greens powder, grass-fed beef sticks, the organ complex, and their bone broth bars. I love the lemon and apple. I also use their essential C complex and more. Visit paleovalley.com/promos/Elle Russ for 15% off. I also love Primal Kitchen. They make delicious paleo-approved, gluten-free, grain-free, soy-free, and no refined sugar products, and I use them daily, from their collagen powders and sauces and marinades to their avocado and olive oil. So good, so healthy. Visit primalkitchen.com and use code L10 for 10% off. I also love paleo powder and use it almost on everything I cook. They make incredible seasoning blends, and they also have these incredible grain-free coatings that feel just like crispy breadings that you would have had prior to knowing that there's another way. So visit paleopowder.com and use code L15 for 15% off.